It's there! Holy moly, this one's going to go big.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. I've got a story for you for this video. We're going back to 1988 into 1989. And the sort of interesting thing about this one is it's a story that was told to me by a friend the other week. He says, look, I know you do your channel about the fruit machines and the fruit machine emulation. You know, he watches some of the videos. He said, there was just this thing that popped into my head. I was thinking about something else the other day and this popped into my head and I thought next time I see Degsy, I'll tell him about this to see if it's something that he's interested in relaying on his channel as a tale. Now, it's a true story. It's something that happened to this guy back when he was like 16, 17 years old and had his first job. Now, I'm going to anonymise this because even though we're talking about quite a while ago, it's not ancient history. 1988, 89, you know, it's not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. So I'm going to remove place names, company names. I'm going to remove real names as well, obviously, even though I have all that stuff. And I'm going to strip it back to just the details of what was relayed to me. Now, there are two reasons for that. I mean, the first reason is obviously it's just a proper dick move to actually do that anyway, to actually start calling people out and putting sort of names and places together or just without the names, just enough details that you can start to piece together to the rest. That's just a dick move, so I'm not going to do that anyway. The other point as well is that that's not really what this is about. What this is about for me is another facet of this kind of narrative that I've been building now for quite a while on this channel and on the previous Degsy Degworth channel, because that started back in December 2017. So I have been doing this stuff now, making these videos for just over 7 years, and even though it wasn't particularly where my head was when I started that original channel, what it's kind of built into over the years as we've put all of these different things together, I've made all of these videos, we've had all the extra stories, the stuff off Desert Island Fruits and from comments and all the rest of it, is it's just this picture that has increasingly been built of this industry that just never functioned correctly, that was releasing, and indeed right up until the very, very dying days, was releasing fundamentally defective products that did not work as they were supposed to. And over the years, myself included, many, many people have found themselves on the wrong side of that, in the grip of an addiction that has done them very, very real harm. And I've said this before, but I will just say it one more time. I consider myself lucky to have got out in one piece in the condition that I did, and I'm very much aware that it could have gone another way. So in telling you this story, my point here is it's another element of that overall picture. What I will say is that the person who told me this, I've known for a long time and I trust him. He's got absolutely no reason to make this up. I am absolutely confident that he is telling me the truth as he remembers it. And he's given me extra details as well. It's like, I even remember the guy's name. I even remember the pub. He's shown me the pub on Google Maps. He's like, there you go. It's still a pub now, but it was called something different back then, and all the rest of it. I'm going to strip all that stuff out. There's kind of a concept in, forgive me, it sounds a little bit wanky, but in journalism, if you will, of protecting your sources. And whilst I don't necessarily go into that kind of, like it's the fucking Watergate scandal or something, but there is an element of the job of the journalist and the publication is to do their fact-checking on the back end, but then protect their sources when they present the story to the world. Because it's the story that's the important part, not exactly who did what where in terms of individuals. So in this case, for example, I don't think it matters who this guy was that my friend knew back in 88, 89, and I certainly don't think it matters what his real name is, even though I have all of that stuff. So let me set the scene for you. We are talking about a large UK town in the back end of the 1980s, and my friend had got his first job after coming out of school at a local engineering company, a mid-sized engineering company that is still around, very much around today, in a far, far bigger form that everyone will know the name of. And he was there as kind of like his first job as a teenager, and he was getting involved with all the stuff that was going on in his area, and he started going out with some of the guys on a lunchtime to a local pub. 1980s being what they were, it's a little bit of a slacker time in terms of having liquid lunches and all the rest of it. And one of the guys who was coming along to the lunches at their pub, it was known to them that he had worked at Bellfruit. That's why we've got two Bellfruit fruit machines on the screen here in front of you. It's also why I've picked two machines from the £4 era, because these are going to be about the right time. I'm not saying it's these two particular machines. My friend cannot remember the names of the machines, but he absolutely remembers Bellfruit. And this guy had worked as a coder at Bellfruit. He left Bellfruit and then he'd gone to work at this engineering company. And they would make a fairly regular point. There was this pub, it was pretty close, it was in walking distance, so they would very often go to this pub at lunch. And of course, as was the style in the 1980s, I mean, not so much now, but certainly back then, every single pub would have fruit machines. Certainly one, but most likely two. Sometimes more than that, but fruit machines were a very, very common fixture in the pubs. So they would go to the pub for their lunch, and it was known that this guy had just finished work not that long ago at Bellfruit. One day they were in there, and what they do, they go and sit down. They had like the favourite table to sit in, and it was down near where the fruit machines were. And one day they'd gone in, they got the drinks, they got the food, they sat down, they'd finished the meal, and as they were finishing the meal, the guy who'd worked at Bellfruit said, "I can't play this, and I can't even go over there and play it with you, but just put £2 or £3 in that machine there, and you're going to win on it." So there was kind of like, well, okay, this guy probably knows. So a couple of them went over to the fruit machine, including my friend, put £2 or £3 in, and yeah, the machine was happy. It paid out. They won money, and they went back to the table and said, "Oh, nice one, mate. We've won a few quid on there." I said, "Yeah, I thought you would." And this became a pattern. Every time they would go into the pub, even when it was really quiet, this guy would be able to say to them when to play the machine. But the critical point is here that he could do that when nobody else had played the machine. Because when my friend was telling me this story, I'm like, well, okay, but with a compensated machine, that's not really very difficult. You don't even need to have remotely been involved in making the things, because compensated machines, if you're kind of even vaguely acquainted with them, it's pretty easy to tell if you're watching somebody else play them sort of how happy the machine is and whether it's likely to pay out or not. And if you were involved with making the machines, then that would be an absolutely slam dunk. No problem whatsoever. But my friend was like, no. This is when nobody had played the machines. He could do this just by sitting down and watching it. And I'm like, hang on a minute, that's a different thing here. Let's just wind back a little bit and go over that again. So you go into the pub, Monday lunchtime, it's dead quiet. It says yes. Be there doors sometimes, nobody else in. Right, okay, so you go to the bar, yeah, you get your drinks, sit down at your table near the fruit machines, yeah. There's nobody else in the pub at that point. Yeah, there might be a couple of old boys at the bar, whatever, but it's quiet in there. We're sat down at our table, we're pretty close to the fruit machines. Yeah, okay, and then you have your lunch, right, yeah, and then by the time you finished eating, nobody's gone anywhere near the fruit machines. Nobody's put money in, nobody's played them, nothing. It's just been sat there in attract mode, and he's like, yeah. And then before you leave the pub, or when you're getting ready to leave the pub, this guy who worked at Bellfruit, he said, yeah, that's right, he would then say to you whether or not to play the machine based on just watching it for a bit in attract mode. And he's like, yes, that is my recollection of how this went. And he never called it wrong. It was kind of like, after a bit, it got to be like his party trick. And it was like, I'm not going to go over there and play them because I'm not supposed to. I'm not even going to stand next to you while you're playing them. But for as long as there is a Bellfruit machine in this pub, and it's one of the ones that I know about, or one of the ones that I worked on, I'll tell you if you should play it or not before we go. And some days he would say, don't bother. They'd sit down, they'd have the dinner, they'd watch the machines for a bit, and he'd say, no, I'll leave it. It's not going to pay out. And they'd say, okay, fair enough. And then every single time, without fail, when he said to them, you should go and play that one, and it was only ever the Bellfruits. If there was a machine by another company there, if it was a Barcrest, didn't have a clue. He would never say anything about a Barcrest or a Maygay or anything else. It was only the Bellfruit and only the ones that he knew about. And he never missed. His track record on this was 100% success. Whenever he said to them, go and play the machine, or go and play, well, not the machines, that machine there, go and play that machine, it's ready to pay. It almost became like, oh, is it free money time now, Fred? Is it free money time, Fred? Yeah, you can go and play it, put some money in, it'll pay out. So you can tell very, very clearly, it's very, very obvious from what I'm saying, what we're talking about here. We are talking about a machine that has a tell in attract mode to tell someone who knows what that is, whether or not the machine is going to pay. This is not watching someone play it. It's not watching the machine behaviour. I mean, even like, for example, on the Barcrests, like when Barcrest started chipping their 70-pounders, they changed the collect button behaviour. I've talked about that in more than one video where you could tell if a Barcrest was chipped or not in the 70-pound era by whether or not the collect button stopped flashing or carried on flashing when you were collecting the bank. Sketchy enough all by itself, but it did at least require either you watching someone playing the machine or playing the machine itself to work out if it was chipped. And that still didn't tell you if the machine was worth playing or not. Famously Vivid with the Pie Factories, with Pie Factories and clones, Vivid changed. And again, so we're talking about facts here. So I'm very much aware that what I'm talking about here, this is just me giving you a story, but we can link this into what we know for a fact. So we know for a fact that Barcrest changed the collect button flash behaviour on the rechips. We know for a fact that Vivid changed what the cash bank area did on the rechips. When Pie Factory and clones got rechipped, I can never remember which way round it was, but on chipped and unchipped, you either just got numerical values flashing around in the cash bank there, or it would scroll across the word cash, and that would tell you if it was chipped or not just from watching it in attract mode. But again, there's never been any suggestion that that would actually tell you if the machine was worth playing or not. Obviously, what we're talking about here is something quite different, which is a specific something that was coded into the attract mode that allowed someone who knew what to look for as to whether that machine had value in it. Now, again, let's stick to what we know for a fact. We know that compensated machines, there's a clue in the name, they're all about the compensators, and different machines may have numerous compensators for all kinds of different things. One of the most stark examples, very, very recently, of course, was the Grand Slam video, which had such nonsense going on with its compensators and the sequences and the setups that it was emptyable on £1,000 jackpot, and you only needed the thing to be £20 happy on the base game. We know about current pots and streak pots, the whole Maygay method of course, there is a video on the channel about that, which is all about cycling, if you will, through the current pot to such a point that you can force out the streak pot. So we know that these things have compensators in them, and we know that these things also have a need in their code to seek out their target percentage. So all that you would need to do here, all it would take is a very subtle difference in the attract mode. So we've got two machines in attract mode here. What you could do here is you could have 3 lamps, for example, that do something slightly different every 10 cycles of attract mode. And that lamp would indicate compensator low, compensator medium, or compensator high. So compensator high means that the machine is ready to pay out. Compensator medium, you know what I mean, could go either way. Compensator low means the machine is on the take. Very obvious example of that. Let's use Pie Factory again. A compensator low on a Pie Factory would be when it was blocking at £2. So if you imagine on a Pie Factory, if that shows you something in attract mode that shows you it's blocking at £2, that would save you even having to put the money in to get on the board to work out that it's blocking at £2. So there are many things about this that we know for a fact. And I think I would say that I have built up a pretty large dossier of evidence against the industry over the last 7 years. There are so many videos now on my channel where I show time and time again how these machines can be emptied, manipulated, and generally fucked with if you know the problems that they have in their code, be it accidental or deliberate, so that's incompetence or corruption, pick your poison. Either way, we do know, again, for a fact that this has been a thing for decades, going right back to the machines of the 1980s, that there were ways to do these, and that carried forward right to the arse end of the £100 jackpot era. For example, I do have the method for how to trap a late chip £100 jackpot perfect deal. There is already a video on the channel about perfect deal, but even when that went through to the £100 jackpot, the original sort of trap and empty was chipped out. Even on the later £100 rechips of that, there are still ways to trap it. I haven't made the video for that, and one of the things that was said to me is, you know what, there are, maybe not so much now, because that was, 2 or 3 years ago I made that video, but it was said to me, you know what, there's actually still a handful of these out there, so it might not be the best video to make. So I've sat on that one, but what that tells us is that there's 35, 40 years of this nonsense of compensated machines being fuckable with. So if this were in isolation, if what I'm telling you here about these Bellfruit machines having a tell in attract mode was to basically tell you where the compensators were, if it were just that in isolation, you say, oh, come on, mate, pull the other one, whatever, what a load of shite. But against the backdrop of all of these other things that we know for a fact have been a problem or are a problem, there are hundreds of videos on my channel covering this stuff. There's all the conversations that we've had at Desert Island Fruits. There's the other YouTube channels out there. Cheerful Pessimist has gone now. His channel is gone, but there was loads of stuff on his channel. We all know for a fact that this stuff is real. So against that backdrop, is it actually unbelievable that back in the late 1980s, there was an ex-Bellfruit coder who knew about on the machines that he'd worked on. Now, whether he put them in himself or one of the other guys who'd worked on it had put them in and it was shared knowledge, whatever it may be, is it beyond the realms of believability that they did something in attract mode to tell you where the compensator was up to and if it was worth playing or not, if that machine had profit in it or not? Because again, let's think about JPMs and numbering. Again, yes, you had to put money in it to play it, but you only needed to play, 20, 25 credits, maybe 30 credits at the outer edge. through a JPM, through a roller coaster, through an Indiana Jones, through a Adders and Ladders, any of those, that other era of the sort of classic numbering JPMs, you would never need to lose more than 3, 4, 5 quid on those to know. Then the machine would literally tell you, if it was showing you 1s and 12s, it would say, yes, I can afford a jackpot if you know how to get it out. And if it didn't show you 1s and 12s, you walked. So I think we're not actually talking about too much of a stretch here to have a very subtle something or other in the attract mode that somebody who knew what they were looking for could read, and given a few minutes to watch the machine in attract mode, was basically able to determine where the compensators were at in this machine. And that's where we get to this pub in the late 1980s, where the ex-Bellfruit guy was able to say with a 100% accuracy hit rate whether or not a £4 jackpot Bellfruit machine was worth playing. Now, one question that has been asked about this stuff, when we've been dealing with other emptiers and tricks and manipulators and all the rest of it, and we've been talking about them over at Desert Island Fruits, one of the questions that's been asked there more than once now is, surely this is pretty easy to find out. Can't we just look at the code and work out what's in there? And the answer to that from people who know about this stuff say no. What's actually in the ROMs and what you can pull out of the ROMs is what we call essentially it's compiled code. And when you get into some of these older machines, you're talking about machine code assembly, that sort of thing. So, which is quite difficult to decrypt anyway. But also, what is in the ROMs here, it's not like the source code. It's not the original material that was used to put the code together. It's a little bit like the emulator itself. So when you've got MFME running on your PC, that the executable that you've got on your PC, that is the compiled executable version of the emulator. All of the source code, all of the stuff that goes into that is left behind. That's one of the reasons why when Wizard passed away, that was the end of development on his emulator. Even though we've all got the emulator, you can't get the raw source code back out of the emulator because you're looking at the final compiled version of it. That's why for stuff like Indiana Jones, where we were hacking the Win series out of Indiana Jones, like the only way we could do that really was to find the memory address where it wasn't me who did that, it was Mort who put the legwork in on that, where Mort actually found the address in memory where the high-low real value was being stored, and we were able to manipulate what the machine did from there, because the code that we can actually get out of the ROMs and is visible from the ROMs really is kind of like hieroglyphics. It's not the original code, you don't have the original source code comments, and you don't have the thought processes of the person who wrote the code either. It's like even when you can see the code, it can be famously difficult sometimes to work out what code is doing if it's not code that you wrote, because you don't know how the person who wrote it was thinking. So that can be a really slow and difficult process even when you have the code. And in the case of fruit machines, we don't have the code. We only have what the ROMs are actually running in their final compiled form. So it's not like we can chuck a sort of computer program at this to work it out and tell us what this is doing. Is this in there or anything like that? So that's why all this stuff still remains a little bit of a mystery and a little bit of a dark art even now, because you'd kind of think, logically you might think, well, we've got the emulator and we've got the ROMs. Between those two things, can't we just completely disassemble how these things work and reverse engineer them? And the answer to that is no. Now, I'm not a coder, but people who are coders have explained in really good detail over at Desert Island Fruits what the difficulties with this stuff are, and particularly when you get back to these older machines from the 80s and 90s, which were using programming languages and techniques as well, which are kind of a lost art form now as well. So we can't really do that. So ultimately, it comes down to what you feel about this personally. Do you think this story is true or not? I am sure it's true. I am sure that my friend is telling me the truth, and that he did put it with the caveat. He said, bear in mind it was, 35, 36 years ago, and I was a teenager, but that is absolutely my memory of it. And he can remember so many of the other details, like I say, the pub, the company, the guy's name, all that sort of thing. He's got so many of the details in his head. And you know what it's like? You can picture scenes in your mind, can't you? And I went back to him. I actually went back to him the next day and said, you know what? That thing we were talking about the other day, it's kind of really important if this guy could do this just by watching the machine in attract mode, or if he needed somebody to actually play the machine before he made the call, whether or not it was worth playing. And a friend came back to me and said, no. My memory on this, and I'm pretty sure, is that we could be sat in what was basically an empty or nearly empty pub near the fruit machines. Nobody else goes near the fruit machines. And before we leave the pub, this guy can call it without fail every single time whether or not a Bellfruit machine is worth playing. And every single time he told us to play it, we always won. Now, you can't have the sort of flip side of that coin, where when he told them not to play it, would they have still won or would they have lost? Because if the guy who tells you without fail when the machine is going to pay out, if he's telling you it's not going to pay out, then it would be a bit daft to go and put money in it. So he certainly called it right every single time he told them to play it. And this was not just like a one-off. This became a thing for a period of about 18 months. Now, of course, the machines were changing in that time, but as long as it was a Bellfruit, or as long as one of them was a Bellfruit, and it was a machine that this guy had been involved with whilst he was at Bellfruit, he could always make that call on whether or not the machine was worth playing. And when he told his chums from this engineering company to go and play it, they always won without fail. Now, at this late stage of the game, of course, it doesn't make any difference to anything. And in a way, it doesn't tell us anything that we don't already know. If you personally choose to call bullshit on that and think it's nonsense, then that's fine. But it doesn't change all of the other stuff that we know for a fact. I mean, some people will still try and say, and we've had this conversation at Desert Island Fruit, some people are still saying that Supercharged was a mistake. Fine, we're going to have to agree to disagree on that. And some of the other more blatant ones and the more egregious ones is, it was probably just a mistake. And I'm like, some of them I can get. Some of them I'll buy, that was a mistake or an oversight. But some of them, I'm sorry, I'm just not having it. But either way, incompetence or corruption, it doesn't change the fact that loads of this stuff is out there. And in the specific example of whether or not the £4 era Bellfruits that showed out in attract mode, how happy or not their compensators were, if that's true or false, again, it doesn't change all the other stuff that we know for a fact is true. We also know for a fact, for example, that an ace programmer did get done for this. It was the late 80s, I think. An ace programmer was found out doing this and ended up going to jail. We know that that happened for a fact. So I have made my own determination on this. I am quite sure my friend is telling me the truth and that his memory is correct. For me, it makes sense against the backdrop of what we already know and what my personal thoughts are on this, but you may have a different opinion, and that's fine. But what I also think it comes down to as well, and this is perhaps where it's important, and this is why I do have a very sort of personal involvement with this. I do have some skin in the game, as it were. There are 5 Gambling Low Ebbs videos on the channel, and they're just 5 that I picked. There are God knows how many more stories along those lines that I could have told. There's the one that I said that I'm still very much intending to do as well. The one that's based around the 1994 diary. Oh my God, that was a bad year. So in a way, it almost gives me a little bit of comfort to know that the game was rigged. We were playing against a rigged deck, a stacked game, a cheating house, if you will. If you didn't have the knowledge, if you didn't have the tricks, if you didn't have the contacts, you were just cannon fodder. You were the dumb meat, and your job was just to come up to the machine, lose all your money as your addiction pummeled you into misery after misery after misery, as your brain just couldn't get your head around how these machines with these relatively small jackpots and these, 76 or 80% payouts and, relatively low price of play, how they could just keep taking so much money off you. And we know the answer now. We already know the answer. Completely separate from the subject of this particular video, we know the answer. They never fucking work properly. It was bent. The whole fucking thing was bent all along. And the only way that you could ever beat it, the only way that you could ever come up out on top from any of this shit, was just by kind of being a bit bent yourself. It was learning how these things worked. It was learning that you could fuck with the compensators in a Psycho Cash Beast, that you could knock back invincible boards on a lot of luck, that you could manipulate an alien into paying out jackpots that it didn't want to pay, and leave them so battered behind you that they would want over £70 just to get on the board. Or the single most spectacular example, I think, in terms of how battered you could leave a machine was, of course, just the ticket, which would block for literally hundreds of pounds if it had been well and truly done. And again, as chance would have it, most recently, Grand Slam, a £1,000 jackpot compensated machine, and they fucked that up as well. So for me, this is entirely believable. The idea that in the late 1980s, there was an ex-Bellfruit guy who went to the pub with his mates at his new job and had just given him a sly, yeah, go on, mate, stick a few quid in that, you're going to win. Or, oh, not today, mate, that's going to be taking your money off you. Yeah, I can 100% believe that that is the case. And I guess the only consolation now, and that's kind of what I'm driving at there, is the thing that gives me some consolation and comfort in the here and now was thinking, fucking hell, mate, you never had a chance, did you? But I will leave it with you. I mean, you can't argue with all the other stuff, all the stuff that's been covered, all the stuff that I've demonstrated, all the stuff that we have seen working just on my channel alone, let alone all the other channels and the conversations at Desert Island Fruits and everything else. The case for the prosecution has already rested. We've already found the industry guilty. The only, the biggest crime of all here is that they all just got away with it. Well, apart from the poor guy from Ace who got sent down. And I'm not even blaming the coders. This is the other thing. This is why I think I've got no interest in actually using any names here, because it was mentioned over at Desert Island Fruits by someone who said, look, I'm okay talking about this stuff on the forums here, but I don't particularly want my stuff on your channel. So I appreciate that's a bit daft because I'm posting on a set of forums here, but I don't really want it out on your channel where it's potentially going to get 1,000, 2,000 sets of eyes on it. So yeah, fair enough, no problem. But one of the things that's been hinted at by or suggested by more than one person is that the coders at these companies were often in small teams. They were often overworked. They were often on very tight deadlines. They were given unrealistic deadlines. There were people who perhaps weren't fully skilled up enough to be doing some of the stuff that they were doing, but it was management were pushing them, get it done, get it ready, get it out the door, let's sell our next product. So it's not about the people involved either. I'm stepping back from that and taking a bigger top-down view of an industry that was fundamentally broken, for decades, and incidentally still is as well. I'm a member of Jackpotty on Facebook, and there's still conversations. Apparently these allegedly random fucking machines that have got cycles on them, you can fuck around with them on different games and the community features and all that sort of thing. There are some games that people are still travelling for and all that sort of thing. You know, if you can't get a random game right, I mean, a random game, that should be a slam dunk to get a random game right. I appreciate that compensate machines do bring all kinds of complications into the equation, but that's still not an excuse for fucking it up for decades like this lot did. But they're still fucking it up even now on the random machine. So this has been a problem forever and ever. And I am slightly reminded of that famous quote from the movie War Games, you know, where the computer, what is it called, the Whomper or the Whopper or something, simulates like millions upon millions of instances of nuclear war, and every single one of them ends with the entire planet being wiped out. And it's not bad. I actually rewatched it. I thought, oh god, the middle of last year, War Games, it's still a brilliant film, it's a good watch. But the computer at the end of it all finally concludes, on the brink of destroying the world itself, says, what is it? A strange game, Professor Falcon. The only winning move is not to play. And I think that's where we're at with compensated fruit machines. If you didn't know the tips and the tricks, if you didn't have the knowledge, if you didn't know about numbering, if you didn't know about streaks, if you didn't know about compensators, if you didn't know about emptiers, and if you didn't know, I don't know, about the attract mode that would tell you if the machine was worth playing or not, whatever it, take your pick from the hundreds upon hundreds of examples of how these things just did not work properly, we are indeed left with the conclusion that the only winning move is not to play. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll catch up with you next time. But for now it is, goodbye.
Strange game. The only winning move is not to play.